Close your eyes. Imagine a sky so wide it swallows the horizon. Stars like cold diamonds scattered across velvet black. A crackling fire warms your face while the wind brushes your hair like a ghost from the past. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howls not out of fear, but simply to remind the world it exists. This isn't a dream. This is the American Wild West, a time when cowboys slept with rifles under their heads, and coyotes watched them from the shadows. Tonight, I'll take you there, not in battle, not in bounty, but in sleep. Together, we'll explore the untamed wilderness, the myths, the quiet nights under canvas skies. Let your mind drift westward. Begin with the first chapter of your journey into sleep. The western sky, unlike anything in the modern world, stretched without interruption, painting hues of purple and deep blue as the sun dipped behind jagged cliffs. It was in this transition between light and darkness that cowboys made camp. The day's dust still clung to their coats, their boots worn and cracked from hours on the trail. There was a hush to the land, a stillness that only the wilderness could whisper. The only sounds were the creak of leather, the stomp of a restless horse, and the first crackle of a fresh campfire. With rough hands, they gathered wood, dry sagebrush, and fallen branches, stacking them carefully to spark the night's only source of warmth. The fire was sacred. It meant safety, heat, and the promise of rest. They didn't talk much. Words felt unnecessary beneath such a sky. Lying down under the open air was no act of romance. It was necessity. A canvas roll was laid across the ground, sometimes no more than a thin blanket between flesh and frozen earth. The cold crept up through the soil, wrapping around bones like an invisible snake. Yet, sleep still came. Perhaps not easily, but deeply. The type of sleep earned through miles walked and cattle herded. They curled their hats over their eyes to block the wind, and some stuffed bandanas in their ears to drown the haunting sound of distant wolves. The night wasn't silent. Nature, in its own language, sang lullabies to those who dared rest in her lap. Some cowboys spoke to the stars, others to God. A few simply listened. Above them, stars shimmered without competition from electric lights. Constellations were old friends to those who slept beneath them. Orion guarded the night like a sentinel with a celestial belt. The Milky Way poured across the heavens like a river of light. Reminder that even in the wilderness, there was beauty too vast to understand. These cowboys, who rarely knew luxury, were richer than kings in those moments. For what palace could offer such a ceiling? No roof, no walls, just air and infinity. Their thoughts drifted between dreams and memories, their minds settling like dust after a long ride. No alarms, no clocks, just the slow turning of the earth under their backs. In the distance, a coyote called, one long, aching note, followed by a series of short yips. It echoed across the plains, bouncing off rocks and curling around sleeping men. But they did not wake. They were used to it. The coyote's cry was not a threat, was a presence. Proof that something alive watched from beyond the glow of crive. The fire. These animals were clever, often curious, rarely dangerous, unless desperate. Their songs were nightly visitors, reminders that the wilderness was shared. Some men claimed the coyotes spoke to each other like mournful poets, telling stories across the dark. Others believed they warned of things unseen. Firelight danced on the underside of tree branches, flickering like silent ghosts. The shadows it cast were long and thin, stretched like figures in a dream. The smell of smoke clung to every fiber of clothing, a perfume of survival. Flames popped and sparked, sending tiny embers into the air like fireflies. One cowboy stirred in his sleep, muttering nonsense, perhaps reliving an old gunfight or an embrace long past. Sleep here wasn't gentle, it was layered, restless at times, but necessary. In the morning, there'd be no beds to make, no curtains to pull back, only ash, footprints, and another mile to ride. Coyotes weren't the only guests of the night. Owls, silent in their flight, watched from high perches. Calls, low and hollow, added to the night's orchestra. Mice skittered through dried leaves. Occasionally, a rattlesnake would curl near warm rocks, not far from a sleeping saddlebag. But these were not interruptions. This was simply life in balance. The men who lived here understood that the land wasn't theirs, were merely passing through. Their dreams were filled with landscapes, horses, and the taste of stale biscuits. They didn't wish for comfort, they wished for calm, and most nights they found it. When clouds rolled in, the stars disappeared, and the temperature dropped sharply. Some men turned in their sleep, drawing their coats tighter. Others didn't move at all, their bodies already in deep rest. Rain was a cruel visitor. It could soak through wool in minutes and turn a night under the stars into a soggy test of endurance. But even then, they rarely complained. Complaints were reserved for things that could be changed. Weather was not one of them. They slept as best they could, faces hidden from the sky, hearts beating slowly with the rhythm of horses breathing. Nearby, dreams, when they came, were vivid and strange. The wilderness did something to the mind. It unraveled memories, mixed them with sounds of the night, and built stories too wild to repeat. One might dream of a woman's voice calling from a river, or a gun misfiring in a canyon. Another might see himself as a boy again, chasing a wild Mustang across yellow grass. These dreams clung to them, lingering even after waking. Kay didn't share them. Dreams were private currency in the West Encampment, symbolic, sacred, kind of thing you ponder in silence while tying your boots. By morning, the fire was only a nest of glowing coals. Birds began to stir. A chill remained in the bones, but movement brought back heat. One by one, they rose, stretching sore limbs and brushing dirt from their clothes. Coffee was brewed in blackened tins, strong enough to wake the dead. Conversations were few. What needed to be said could wait until the next camp. For now, they packed their rolls, cinched their saddles, and prepared for the next stretch of wild land. Another day, another sky, another night to sleep beneath stars. This was the rhythm of their lives. Ride, rest, repeat. A song of survival and simplicity. In a world that knew no schedule, the land dictated the rules. And each night, when the sun bowed low and coyotes sang, they'd find their spot near the fire, lay their heads on rolled up coats, and let sleep take them back into the arms of the West. Not for glory, not for riches, but for peace. In that peace, they found something most men never know. Freedom now. As you drift, imagine yourself lying there. Let the fire warm your thoughts. Let the stars be your ceiling. Let the coyotes sing you to sleep. A campfire in the Wild West wasn't merely about light or warmth. It was a companion. It spoke its own language through every crackle, pop, and shifting ember. Cowboys could almost interpret its moods, knowing when the fire needed more wood, when it was angry, when it was calm. They sat around it like ancient storytellers, letting the flickering orange dance on their tired faces. The flames reflected in their eyes, as if revealing fragments of long-forgotten tales. They didn't always speak aloud, but the fire spoke, for them, carrying memories into the smoke that drifted slowly toward the stars. At times, someone would whistle low and steady, letting the melody melt into the nighttime air. It was usually a tune picked up in a mining town, maybe a hymn from a mother's lips long ago, or just something invented for the silence. Music had a way of settling nerves. It filled the space between the rustling grass and the sigh of sleeping horses. Around the fire, the tension of the day unraveled slowly, like a tightly wound rope finally released. Men who hadn't smiled in hours found comfort in the rhythm. Not joy was rare, but a soft kind of ease. The light from the fire barely stretched past the edge of the camp, leaving the rest of the world in pitch black. Beyond that ring of firelight was the unknown, wandering eyes of predators, snakes that slithered unseen, and bandits with quieter boots than you'd hope. But the fire was trusted. It stood guard in its own way, warning off wild things with its unpredictable crackles and bursts. A fire was never truly tamed. It listened, responded, sometimes even rebelled. But when treated with respect, it became part of the night's family, just as vital as a horse or a rifle. Flames revealed faces that otherwise would have remained hidden, scarred chins, weathered brows, eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. The light painted men as they truly were. Not heroes, not legends, just men. Men who missed home. Men who feared loneliness more than death. They never said these things, of course. Vulnerability was a luxury, but in the quiet of firelight, something softened. Sometimes someone would speak of a woman, a letter never sent, or a child seen only once. The fire never judged. It consumed the confessions in silence, sending them skyward in curls of smoke. When someone added fresh wood to the flames, the sparks would leap like startled spirits. The smell of pine or mesquite filled the air, earthy and sharp, mixing with sweat and leather and dust. Cowboys watched the embers rise, hypnotized by their dance, imagining stories inside each flicker. Some saw their past, others saw what could have been. The fire was a mirror, and in its warmth they found fragments of clarity. No preacher, no saloon philosopher could offer the same comfort as a good fire under the stars. It was church. It was therapy. It was a teacher made of light and heat. As the fire burned lower, voices dropped to whispers. They spoke of weather, of broken horses, of cattle too smart for their own good. They spoke of towns they'd passed through and those they'd never dare enter again. Sometimes silence won. Not an awkward silence, but one filled with mutual understanding. Man had his ghosts, and the fire gave them room to breathe. They flickered in and out like shadows cast by dancing flames. Around that glow, no one was a stranger, no one a fool. They were equals in weariness, joined by the road and the restless dream of freedom. One of the youngest riders, barely old, enough to shave, fell asleep near the fire with his hand tucked under his cheek like a child. His breath was slow and even, a rhythm untouched by regret. The older cowboys looked at him and remembered their own first night's nervous alert, listening for every sound. They knew he'd learn soon enough. The West-aged men, fast. The fire didn't care for age. It gave the same heat to all, too. But the way men sat around, it revealed how much of themselves they'd lost to the trail. The young still leaned forward. The old leaned back. Wind sometimes swept in from nowhere, turning flames into wild dancers. Sparks flew sideways, and smoke curled unpredictably. Cowboys shifted, moving bedrolls, adjusting hats, shielding their eyes. They didn't complain. Nature was a companion to fickle, firm, unforgiving. A gust of wind could tell stories too, of oncoming storms, distant mountains, or herds on the move. The fire always responded. It bent, it hissed, but it didn't die. And that stubborn persistence mirrored the men who fed it. They were wanderers, not because they wanted to be, but because staying still was harder than moving on. Occasionally, they roasted something over the fire beans, dry biscuits, even rabbits caught earlier in the day. The taste didn't matter much. Hunger made anything a delicacy. They shared in silence, passing 10 plates, taking swigs from battered canteens. Meals weren't for conversation. They were rituals, proof of survival. A warm bite, a hot drink, a few more heartbeats of comfort before sleep returned. The fire, always crackling, never stopped. It seemed to understand hunger, too. It consumed whatever it was given, be it wood, meat, or whispered worries, as the final log turned to glowing coal. The men settled into their makeshift beds. Some pulled coats tighter, others tucked hands beneath arms. The fire faded gently, not with a scream, but a sigh. It left behind a pool of warmth and a memory of presence. In its absence, the stars grew brighter, the coyotes louder, the air colder. But even as the light disappeared, the comfort remained. They'd wake with ash in their hair and smoke on their skin, but tonight they slept. In the fire, now only embers, had done its job once more. Asterisk. As dawn approached, the darkness didn't vanish all at once. It retreated slowly, pulled away like a blanket sliding off a tired body. The fire had turned to ash, barely smoldering, leaving behind only a faint heat that clung to the ground. Cowboys stirred, not because of alarms, but because of instinct. They knew the sky by heart. When the stars began to fade and the breeze shifted, it meant the night was over. The first movement was always slower, hand brushing dust from an eyebrow, a leg stretching beneath stiff denim. The silence was not broken, only reshaped. Night in the Wild West was long, but not empty. The ground recorded every moment, holding footprints and impressions like a diary written in soil. Horses left gentle craters near the edges of the camp, while small animals had danced through the open spaces, their tracks crossing like forgotten signatures. A raccoon had visited, unnoticed in the dark. A snake had passed near a bedroll, but kept on, uninterested. The earth beneath them was alive, though it made no sound. When they woke, they didn't ask what had come and gone. They simply accepted that the night had visitors. Blankets used for sleep were rough and worn, often patched with leather or lined with sheepskin. They held the scent of sweat, smoke, and prairie wind. Some were family heirlooms, others traded in dusty towns for a few coins. Cowboys clutched them tightly in the coldest hours, wrapping themselves like moths in cocoons of threadbare warmth. There were no pillows-only saddlebags, folded jackets, or nothing at all. Sleep came not from luxury, but from exhaustion, the kind that settled into the bones and made even the hardest ground feel like home, if only for a few hours. Sleeping outdoors wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unpredictable. Ants found their way into food bags, rain clouds formed without warning, and the moon sometimes lit up the camp so brightly it stole away dreams. Yet no one cursed the elements. They were expected guests in this untamed world. Cowboys adjusted without fuss, shifting positions, moving closer to each other. When needed, turning their backs to the wind. Complaining didn't stop the cold. It didn't block the wind. Survival was about acceptance, and in that quiet surrender, they found a strange kind of peace. Silence during the night was never total. It was filled with soft, sound snoring, the creak of a leather strap, the faint shuffle of a boot as someone turned in their sleep. Sometimes a horse would grunt or shuffle its hooves. These noises weren't disruptions. They were lullabies. They marked life. The more experienced riders found comfort in those sounds, knowing that everything was as it should be. It was only true silence that raised concern. The coyotes stopped howling and the wind died completely. That was when hearts beat faster. The absence of noise meant something was watching. Dreams in the wild came without rules. One night, a man might dream of the ocean, even if he'd never seen it. The next, he'd relive a moment from years ago, his mother's kitchen, the smell of stew, a song played on an old violin. The brain, untethered from the trail, wandered where the body could not. Sometimes the dreams brought comfort, Other times, they opened wounds. But each cowboy knew not to fight them. In the morning, no one shared what they'd seen. They simply rolled up their blankets, dusted off their hats, and carried their private visions with them. Some nights, the moon was so bright, it cast shadows like sunlight. Trees stood tall and silver, and every blade of grass shimmered under the lunar glow. It made sleep harder, but the view was its own reward. Cowboys stared upward, watching clouds move like ships across a quiet sea. In those moments, they felt something ancient stir. Inside them, something that connected them to the first humans who had ever looked up and wondered. The stars whispered secrets, and the moon offered calm. Even the wildest hearts softened under its light. Others found comfort in routine. One man always removed his boots and set them facing east. Another tucked a small photograph into his coat before lying down. Superstitions ran deep out here. Some swore by certain sleeping positions to avoid nightmares. Others muttered short prayers before closing their eyes. It wasn't religion so much as habit rituals carved into memory by years on the trail. In a world so uncertain, these tiny acts brought order. And order in the wilderness was a kind of safety. When it rained, it didn't ask permission. Water drummed against faces, soaked through clothes, and turned dry earth into mud. If there was no tarp or tree nearby, cowboys simply curled tighter, enduring until morning. They'd wake, up chilled, clothes heavy, skin wrinkled from damp. But they didn't curse the rain. It meant water in the rivers and grass for the horses. It meant life. Complaints were saved for things that could be fixed, and rain, like the wild, wasn't one of them. It simply was, and so they accepted it, like another part of sleep itself. By the time the sky turned soft with sunrise, the camp felt like a dream had come and gone. Smoke drifted from the dying coals, mixing with morning mist. The cowboys stood slowly, stretching limbs and brushing grit from their backs. They didn't rush. The world wouldn't rush them. Breakfast was simple jerky, leftover beans, black coffee. But the taste was real, grounded, earned. With the sun rising behind them and the memory of sleep still clinging to their lashes, they began another day on the trail. Tired, yes, but never broken. Coyotes were never truly far. Their presence was as sure as the stars, their cries slicing through the night like soft daggers. Some cowboys feared them once, long ago, but most had learned to coexist. The coyote wasn't just a scavenger, was a witness. It watched from the hilltops, eyes gleaming, studying the fire's light from the safety of darkness. When the cowboy slept, the coyotes crept closer, drawn by the scent of food or the warmth left behind by a hand. Yet, they never attacked. There was an unspoken agreement between species. Observe, don't interfere. Around the fire, they joked about the coyotes, said they were part devil, part dog. Said one looked like a sheriff from Dodge they'd once known. But jokes couldn't hide the truth. They respected those animals. The coyote lived in the wild by its own rules, just like them. It needed no one, trusted few, and traveled light. Some men even admired it. After all, the coyote always survived, and survival was the only real currency out here. Each cry in the night reminded them that they weren't alone. And sometimes, being watched felt oddly like being protected. Cowboy kept a harmonica in his coat. At night, when the others began to doze, he'd play a few soft notes, nothing fancy, just breath and brass and memory. The coyotes would often answer him, their howls rising like harmony to his tune. It wasn't music in a traditional sense. It was a conversation, a slow, mournful exchange between human and wild. The others would smile in their sleep, soothed by the strange duet. Even those who didn't like music during the day found themselves drawn to its quiet magic in the dark. Something about it made the night feel smaller. Companionship was rare on the trail, but it came in many forms. A loyal horse, a well-trained dog, even the presence of another breathing man nearby. They didn't always talk much, but just knowing someone else was there shaped in the dark, a shared breath, a familiar cough made sleep come easier. Loneliness was a cold, more biting than any wind, and though they prided themselves on independence, every man out there had, at some point, whispered thanks to the sky for not being the only soul beneath it. Dogs, when part of a camp, slept with one eye open. They curled near their masters, noses buried in tails, ears twitching at the slightest sound. They were better than any alarm system, better even than rifles. A low growl from a dog could wake an entire camp faster than thunder, and yet they didn't bark without reason. They knew the rhythm of the wild. They recognized the sound of a harmless fox versus the approach of something worse. Cowboys trusted their dogs with their lives and with their dreams. Some cowboys tied bells to their saddles or kept pebbles in tin cups to warn of night movement. It wasn't paranoia, it was caution learned the hard way. Bandits sometimes traveled quietly, moving like shadows until they reached a sleeping man's bag. One sound could be the difference between waking up alive or not at all. But even with precautions, they slept. They had to. No one could go days without it, okay? And so, beneath stars and guarded by instinct, they closed their eyes and let their trust drift outward into the night. Occasionally, a man would tell a story before sleep always low, as if afraid the words would wake the past. Tales of gold discovered and lost, of saloons that vanished overnight, of women whose names still burned on the tongue like whiskey. These stories weren't about impressing others. They were rituals, ways to unburden the heart before surrendering. Two dreams. Even those who didn't speak listened, taking in the rhythm of voice, the weight of silence between sentences. In those moments, the Wild West felt less lonely. Coyotes sometimes circled the camp, but never crossed the invisible boundary of firelight. They respected it, feared it perhaps. Men, too, respected that line. The firelight was safety. Beyond, it was mystery. When a cowboy rose in the night to relieve himself, he moved quickly, scanning the brush, listening with more than just ears. He knew that the eyes of the wild were always watching. And sometimes, when he looked long enough into the dark, he swore he saw them yellow, blinking, quiet, waiting. The coyotes didn't leave tracks easily, but when the cowboys rose in the morning, they sometimes found them anyway. Small paw prints near the water pail, near the beans pot, near the horses. Proof of the quiet visitation, yet nothing was taken. The animals were respectful in their own way, just curious, just alive. The cowboys never chased them off. It's in a world so barren, so fierce, even a small, clever creature was a kind of company. To every man out there, no matter how hardened, welcome to the illusion of kinship. As the sky began to fade from black to gray, the coyotes gave one last howl. It rose like steam from the hills, a cry that bent with the wind, echoing off rocks in memory. The men stirred in their sleep, but didn't wake. Their minds were already shifting toward day, toward saddles, trails, and the endless horizon. But somewhere deep inside, they carried the song, a wild lullaby, raw and untamed, wrapped around the edges of their dreams. And the coyotes, sensing the change, slipped away once more into the waiting dawn. The ground in the west was unforgiving. It didn't care if you were tired, if your bones ached, or if your back had bent from a week in the saddle. It was hard, uneven, sometimes icy, even under a hot sky. Yet, cowboys lay upon it night after night, wrapping themselves in what little they had. They found small tricks placing extra cloth under their hips, choosing dirt over stones, leaning against saddlebags to relieve pressure. These were not luxuries. They were lessons passed down from one sore spine to another. No one complained. They simply adjusted. Frost came early in some regions, forming delicate crystals on blankets and boots by dawn. It crept silently, painting leaves with silver and turning breath into little clouds that floated briefly, then vanished. Some men slept with scarves around their mouths, trying to trap what little warmth they could. Fingers stiffened during the night, making it hard to grip reins in the morning. Yet they rose anyway. They had no choice. Comfort was for other men, in other places. Out here, the cold was a fact of life, accepted like death or distance. A cowboy's body changed over time. Muscles hardened, skin thickened. The line between pain and sensation blurred. Sleeping on the cold ground became normal, no harder than sitting upright on a horse all day. Some even said they couldn't sleep in a bed anymore, then it felt too soft, too still. The wilderness rewired them, carving away softness and replacing it with quiet resolve. They didn't see themselves as tough. They saw themselves as present. In presence, in the wild, was the only strength that mattered. They often built small windbreaks using rocks or branches to shield themselves from the chill. Sometimes they dug shallow impressions in the earth, using the ground's natural contour to cradle their backs. Every movement was calculated, every adjustment based on trial and error. There were no manuals, no teachers, just experience. Pain was the greatest tutor of all. By the second or third night, even the most tender-footed rider had found a way to rest, if not comfortably, then at least completely, because fatigue was absolute. Cutes were kept close during the night, sometimes tucked under blankets or used as pillows. Not out of sentiment, but necessity. Scorpions, spiders, and even small snakes liked to curl inside them for warmth. A forgotten boot could mean a bitten foot and a week of agony or worse, so the men checked carefully each morning, shaking out whatever might have crawled inside. It became a ritual. One more reminder that sleep, even in its most peaceful form, was never entirely safe out here. The ground had its own life, and cowboys never forgot that. Their clothing became their armor. Long wool coats doubled as blankets. Leather chaps added a layer between skin and frost. Every item had to serve more than one purpose. Bandana covered the mouth by day and the eyes by night. A hat shielded from sun, rain, and wind alike. Cowboys packed light, but they packed smart, and their survival depended not on what they carried, but on how they used it. Over time, they grew attached to these items, not emotionally, but practically. A good coat was worth more than gold. When snow came early, they dug down, creating nests in the powder to preserve warmth. Firewood became precious then. They rationed it, burned it slow, even shared flames with the neighboring camps if close enough. No one argued over fire in the snow. It was sacred. Watching it burn against a white backdrop was like seeing color for the first time. The heat didn't just warm their hands, reminded them they were alive. And in a landscape that could bury a man in silence, that reminder meant everything. Cold had a way of stealing thoughts. It made conversation slower, fingers clumsier, minds foggier. But in that fog, something else appeared: clarity. Men stopped worrying about things that didn't matter. They focused on breath, on shelter, on the next sip of hot coffee. And in that stripped-down existence, they often found something pure. The ground didn't judge, it didn't speak, but it taught. And what it taught stayed with a man forever. The stars in winter seemed sharper. Fade and twinkle, they cut. Light pierced through the black sky like icicles, and even the moon looked colder. Yet the view was unmatched. Lying on the frozen ground, staring upward, cowboys felt like they were looking into forever. No roof could compare. No cathedral ceiling could inspire the same reverence. Out here, the sky was a teacher, a companion, and a map. It offered no answers, but it made questions feel sacred. Morning came slowly after a cold night. Bones creaked. Breath was visible. Fire was reignited with stiff hands, a tongue, but no one complained. They moved like clockwork, silent, sure, steady. Cold was part of the rhythm, like hooves on gravel or rope in hand, was inescapable, undeniable, and yet, with every shiver, they proved they could endure, that they could lie on the coldest ground and still rise again. Asterisk, the Wild West at night was not quiet in the way a city might be. Its silence had texture layers of wind, insects, and distant echoes. You could lie on your back and hear the world breathe. Crickets sang their endless lullabies. Frogs, if near water, croaked in lazy rhythm. The grass rustled, and sometimes, far off, a branch snapped. These weren't warnings. They were just the earth speaking. Cowboys learned to sleep, not in spite of these sounds, but because of them, okay? The first nights on the trail were hardest for new riders. Carrie Russell sounded like danger. Every howl felt personal. They slept with one eye open, one hand on a weapon. But in time, fear softened into awareness. They learned the patterns. What sounded like a threat was often nothing more than wind slipping between rocks. They learned to tell the difference between a rabbit's hop and a cougar's stalk. Their ears became wise, trained by repetition and necessity. Horses made sounds of their own. They snorted, shifted, stomped. They breathed loud in the cold. These sounds were comforting. A still horse was more concerning than a noisy one. Cowboys listened for these signs. A nervous animal meant something was wrong. But mostly, they dozed together, man and beast sharing the same sky, the same air. In the dark, the bond between cowboy and horse became something unspoken, deepened by shared vulnerability. Owls haunted the night. Their hoots echoed like questions no one wanted to answer. They perched in trees or atop rocks, swiveling their heads in eerie silence. Some believed they were omens. Others thought of them as watchers, but all agreed they were part of the wilderness choir. No one dared mimic their call. It was considered bad luck. The owl had its place, and men had theirs. And when it sang, you listened. The campfire had a voice too. Its crackles and hisses played like a soft percussion. Sometimes it popped loud enough to wake the lightest sleeper, but even that sound was comforting. It meant the fire was alive, still guarding the camp. Flames whispered as they devoured dry twigs, the ash sighing as it settled. The fire's rhythm was hypnotic. Some men swore they heard words in the sounds like echoes of conversations long forgotten. Coyotes, ever present, performed their nightly rituals. They didn't howl for show. It was communication warnings, reunions, territory claims. Their cries rose and fell, weaving through the air like smoke. Cowboys listened without fear. The coyote was predictable, sang from afar. It never snuck in silence. Its song was part of the sleep ritual. Like a bell tower, it marked time dusk, midnight, pre-dawn. Sometimes there was laughter, soft, restrained, but real. A joke remembered, a story whispered, a snore that sounded like a pig's grunt. Even on the coldest nights, humor found a way in. It bubbled up, unnoticed, and disappeared into the dark. No one laughed loud. That would wake the horses. But a chuckle, aloha, shared between blankets, was warmth of its own kind. And out here, every ounce of warmth mattered. Wind was perhaps the most unpredictable sound. Sometimes it crept, gently lifting strands of hair, rattling saddle gear. Other times it roared down from the hills, pushing through trees and tents like a ghost. Cowboys knew to read the wind. A soft breeze meant calm weather, sudden shift, meant change. The wind didn't lie. It spoke of what was coming, and those who listened slept with one foot already in motion. Rain, when it came, spoke in soft drizzles or wild drums. It danced on canvas, splashed into pots, and soaked into the earth. The sound of rain made sleep deeper, heavier. It dulled the edges of fear, covered the whispers of animals. But too much rain was dangerous. It blurred tracks, drowned fires, and turned trails into traps. Yet, even then, its sound was sacred, okay? It sang of growth, of cleansing, of patience, okay? Each night, the wilderness composed a new song. No two nights sounded the same. Cowboys became attuned to these variations, cataloging them unconsciously. They knew which sound meant trouble, which meant peace, and in that knowing, they found rest. Not perfect rest, but real, honest, the kind that only comes when you trust the earth beneath, you and the sky above. There was something humbling about sleeping beneath the open sky. No roof to shelter you, no walls to keep things out, only space, stars, and the slow turning of time. The sky was vast, never ending, a canvas so large it swallowed doubt and fear. Cowboys would often lie on their backs after the fire died, just staring upward. The stars looked close enough to touch, sharp like needles, pulsing faintly. They gave no answers, asked no questions. They just were. And in their quiet glow, men remembered how small they truly were. Some nights the sky was clear, painted with constellations. They traced them with rough fingers, naming them like old friends: Orion, Cassiopeia, the Dipper. These stars told stories older than the land beneath them. Cowboys used them for direction, for wonder, and sometimes just to pass the time. They felt like witnesses, eternal and impartial. What men did on earth seemed less important under that sky. The heavens endured. The men below simply visited. On cloudy nights, when the stars disappeared, the world felt closer. The darkness was heavier, thicker, more present. Without the stars, it was harder to dream. The ceiling of the night closed in, pressing thoughts inward. These were the nights when memories returned and regrets whispered louder. When men pulled blankets tighter, not from cold, but from loneliness. Still, they slept, 'cause the trail didn't pause for weather or feelings. Tomorrow always came. The moon was a guide, a guardian. When it was full, the camp glowed in silver. Shadows stretched long, and coyotes gave it space. Even the trees looked different, their leaves glistening like polished coins. Some men called the moon a thief that stole the darkness, made secrets visible. Others saw it as a blessing, a lantern in God's hand. Whatever the belief, all agreed. The moon changed everything. It wasn't just light, it was presence. The Milky Way, on clear nights, looked like a path in the sky, glowing. Roads stretching from one edge of the world to the other. Cowboys stared at it and wondered what lay at its end. Some believed it was the road to heaven. Others thought it was where souls traveled after death. They didn't speak these thoughts aloud, but in the silence between stories, their eyes drifted upward, searching for more than just stars. Shooting stars were rare but sacred. When one streaked across the sky, it cut through the night like fate in motion. Some whispered wishes, others made silent promises. No one ignored them. A shooting star was a reminder. Things moved, even in the vastness, even in the dark. And for men who lived each day uncertain of the next, movement meant hope. It meant there was something out there still unfolding. There were no ceilings more honest than the sky. No fresco, no painted roof, no cathedral dome could match its beauty. And yet, it offered no comfort. It didn't protect from rain or cold or wind. It didn't care if you cried beneath it, but it listened. It watched. And sometimes that was enough to lie on the ground and know that something infinite hovered above and reachable. Unjudging, that was peace of a different kind. Some nights, the sky was completely black, not from clouds, but from absence. No stars, no moon, just void. Those were the hardest nights. The air felt thicker, the silence louder. Cowboys often woke unsettled after such nights, unsure why. The absence of the sky felt like a loss, like a curtain had been drawn over something sacred. But eventually, light would return. A single star would reappear, and with it, breath. Children born in towns never saw the sky like this. Too many lamps, too many walls. But the cowboys knew. They carried the memory of it always, even when they eventually left the trail, even when they married or settled or died. The sky stayed with them. It became part of who they were, silent, vast, steady, a ceiling that had once cradled their dreams and guarded their sleep. And so, each night, as they unrolled blankets and adjusted saddlebags, they looked up. Not for signs or answers, but out of habit, out of respect. The sky had watched them live. It would one day watch them die. And in between, it gave them stars to dream beneath. It gave them a place to rest. And in a world that gave very little, that was a gift. Asterisk, long after the flames died, the embers remained glowing, whispering, shifting. They were the last to sleep and the first to wake. Cowboys watched them closely, poking gently with sticks, stirring the soft orange to life. The embers didn't shout like fire. They murmured, they hummed, they spoke in slow rhythms only the tired could understand. In those final minutes of heat, something sacred lingered, a memory of warmth, a whisper, a protection. Embers told stories too. The way they collapsed into ash, the color they burned, the patterns they left in the dirt. Some men swore they could read them like tea leaves, that they predicted weather, hinted at luck, even mirrored one's thoughts. It was nonsense, mostly, but in a land ruled by instinct, even nonsense had value. And staring into those slow burning coals, a man could believe anything. Were careful never to let the embers die too early. A living ember meant a faster morning fire. It meant less work, less smoke, but it also meant something deeper: continuity. One night's end, fueling the next day's beginning. That cycle comforted them. The world spun on chaos, but the fire could be controlled. It was something they could tend, something that responded when treated with care. Sometimes the embers pulsed when no one touched them, as if breathing. The glow would brighten, then fade, then brighten again. It looked alive. And in the hush of night, with the wind still and the stars blinking above, that slow pulse became a lullaby. Cowboys, wrapped in their coats, would watch it until their eyes closed, till their dreams took them somewhere warmer. There were games, 2 quiet competitions to see who could keep the coals alive longest, could feed them just enough to keep them breathing but not flaring. It took finesse. It's too much fuel and it reignited. Too little and it died. Like most things in the West, it was a balance, a dance between effort and patience, and the men who mastered it earned unspoken respect. Embers glowed different colors depending on the wood. Mesquite burned deep red. Pine offered flashes of blue. Oak glowed soft and gold. Cowboys learned these hues like a second language. Didn't name them, didn't need to. Just knew. And in those colors, they read the temperature, the lifespan, the soul of the flame. On especially quiet nights, someone would tell a story beside the glowing coals. Their voice low, their words chosen slowly. The embers made the perfect audience, silent, steady, attentive. No interruptions, no judgment, just a flickering response with every word. And as the story unfolded, The glow seemed to match its pace, rising with suspense, fading with sorrow. It was pure magic. Its children rarely traveled the trail, but when they did, they too were drawn to the embers. They poked them with sticks, shaped them into patterns, stared at them until sleep stole their eyes. And the old cowboys, the grizzled ones who rarely smiled, would watch. And maybe, just maybe, they'd remember their own first night on the trail. Their first ember, their first moment of feeling safe in the wild. In the morning, embers were the first test. They lived. The day started easier. If not, it meant more time, more flint, more frustration. Cowboys took it personally when their fire died overnight. Not because they needed the heat, but because it felt like failure, like they'd neglected a friend. So they rose early to tend to it, sometimes before even opening their eyes fully. And so, each night, the fire burned, then flickered, then shrank to embers. And even when sleep took them, even when coyotes sang and the cold pressed close, those tiny glowing hearts remained, quiet, steady, eternal, like memories, like hope. A cowboy's hat was more than shade. It was identity, history, protection, and pride. During the day, it shielded against the sun's brutal weight. At night, it became a pillow, a mask, a shield from cold wind or dreams too vivid to face. Some men pulled it low over their eyes before sleep, as if trying to disappear. Others kept it by their side, close enough to touch. Losing your hat was like losing your name. Hats told stories, creases, stains, burns, all speaking of where a man had been. A singed brim meant fire too close. A darkened band meant sweat and survival. You could know a man's whole trail by his hat. And so, when sleep came, they didn't toss it aside. They placed it with care, like a relic, on saddles, on blankets, over hearts. It was part of them. Some said sleeping in your hat brought bad dreams. Others said it warded off spirits, a superstition, or a habit. It shaped nightly ritual. Cowboys, like sailors, held on to beliefs with no proof. They needed anchors, something to cling to when everything else was dust and uncertainty. A hat was that anchor. The hat also kept warmth and it pulled low. It protected ears, folded. It covered a neck, shaped just right. It blocked the moonlight. It was a tool shaped by the trail, molded by sweat, dried by campfire smoke. Each crease earned, each dent remembered. No two were alike, and no cowboy slept the same without his. In town, men removed their hats indoors, but on the trail, rules changed. The sky was their roof, the dirt their floor. Etiquette became survival. You didn't tip your hat to trees. You didn't bare your head to coyotes. And so, the hat stayed intimate in dreams. They'd sometimes find old hats left behind, a fence post, under a bush, beside a dried-out fire pit. A hat with no man meant only one thing. Someone hadn't made it. Cowboys paused when they saw such things. They didn't speak, they just looked. Then they moved on, quieter than before. Some men named their hats, others wouldn't dare, but all had a relationship with it. They cleaned it, shaped it, repaired it with thread and resin. In the silence of night, they'd run fingers along the brim like counting prayer beads. Not out of vanity, but out of memory. Every scuff meant something. A hat could be passed down, from father to son, from partner to friend, worn soft with time, carrying the scent of two lives. These hats were sacred. They held the echo of old voices, of men who had ridden this land before, and when a man wore one, he felt not alone. The coldest camp's hats were clutched in sleep. Not for fashion, not for warmth, but for comfort. A familiar shape, a reminder of identity, a piece of civilization in the wild. It was not just something worn, it was something held, like a promise. like a past. So every night, as the fire dimmed and the wind rose, hats were lowered, pressed over faces, held in arms, placed atop folded coats, not forgotten, never discarded. A cowboy's hat slept when he did, and when the sun rose, they both rose together. Asterix boots weren't just worn, they were trusted. A cowboy's boots carried him through miles of hard earth, over rivers, up hills, across deserts. They were tools as much as clothing. Scuffed, cracked, worn smooth in places where pressure met leather. At night, those boots were placed carefully by the bedroll, toes pointed away, soles down. Superstition said to always point your boots toward the trail, so when morning came, your feet knew the way forward. Every cowboy had a ritual for his boots. Some knocked them together twice, others shook them out and whispered curses, just in case a spider had crawled inside. A few placed small stones in each boot to keep out moisture. Okay, these weren't quirks, they were habits born from experience. One morning with a scorpion in your heel was enough to teach you eternal caution. Boots were rarely removed without a groan. The feet inside them ached, sometimes bled, sometimes swelled to near bursting. But once off, the relief was instant. Steam rose in cold air as socks were peeled. Blisters revealed themselves like secrets. And still, those boots would be worn again the next day without complaint, because they fit, because they'd been molded by the trail and by pain. Some boots had stories. A knife scar on the heel, a bullet grazed near the ankle, a burn mark from a forgotten ember. No two pairs were alike. You could learn a man's history by looking at his boots, how he walked, where he stepped, whether he limped, whether he ran from something or toward it. The boots never lied. They were diaries made of hide and time. During the night, boots were more than footwear. They became pillows, shelves, storage containers. Some cowboys placed dry socks or letters inside. Others kept tobacco, small knives, or keepsakes in the toe. Out in the open, where every object mattered, nothing went unused. The cowboys' boots did more than walk, they held life. Rain was hardest on them. Wet boots turned stiff, cold, and dangerous. A damp boot meant blisters and infection. Cowboys dried them near the fire, turned upside down on sticks. They rubbed them with oil, stuffed them with grass, whatever it took. A ruined boot could end a journey, and no man wanted to die because his soles gave out. Some nights, a cowboy would fall asleep with boots still on. Too tired to remove them, too cold to bother. He'd roll into his blanket, fully clothed, arms crossed, hat down, boots tight, and sleep would still come. The ground made no fuss about how you arrived. It only required that you rest. In towns, boots were cleaned and shined. On the trail, they were scrubbed by mud and time. Polishing was replaced by dust. Decoration replaced by grit. Still, each man took pride in his boots. Not in how they looked, but in what they'd endured. A good pair could last years, could outlive friendships, could outlast most things, except the trail itself. Losing a boot was a disaster. If it fell from a saddle or was left at a riverbank, the search began instantly. No boot meant limping, meant vulnerability, meant shame. Cowboys would rather lose money than footwear. Money could be earned again, but a boot broken in over years, that was irreplaceable. And so, each night, as the fire dimmed and the air grew cold, boots were set beside the bedroll just close enough to grab in danger, just far enough not to crush in sleep. And in the morning, when eyes opened and the sun rose slow, those boots would go on again. No questions. No hesitation. It's just the next step forward. Asterisk. The blanket a cowboy carried wasn't thick, but it held the weight of survival. Rolled tightly behind the saddle by day, unrolled carefully by night, it became a cocoon against the chill, a spire, and endless dust, but in the quiet, dark, it was the closest thing to home. It wrapped around the spine like memory, like hope. Blankets weren't chosen for comfort. They were chosen for durability. Wool was common. It held heat even when wet. Some were stitched from scraps. Others handed down from fathers, uncles, men long gone. They bore holes, burns, patches, and yet they were loved because they worked, because they stayed warm, even when nothing else did. Folding the blanket just right became a skill. Too tight and it lost breathability. Too loose and the cold crept in. Cowboys layered them over bedrolls, tucked them at the feet, wrapped them high around shoulders. It was a process learned through trial, not taught in any book. And when done well, it made the ground feel a little less cruel. When the wind howled, the blanket became armor. Cowboys curled tighter, knees to chest, arms folded inside, breath caught within. The warmth was self-made, trapped in wool, in silence, in stillness. Outside, the world raged. Inside that thin cloth shell, there was only heartbeat and thought. And in that hush, dreams grew louder. Some men embroidered initials into their blankets. Others tied fringe or colored thread. These were not for decorations. They were for identity. Camps were chaotic in the dark. Bedrolls looked the same. A mark was memory, a way to claim, to connect. In a world where most things were lost or traded, your blanket was yours. Tears were common. Fires popped and sent embers flying. One burn could spread, but rather than discard a ruined blanket, cowboys patched them, sewed with needle and sinew, with thread borrowed from saddle kits. A repaired blanket was a badge of honor. It meant you'd survived something. It meant you'd been cold, but not broken. On the rarest nights, a cowboy might share his blanket. A friend too ill to move. Stranger with no cover. These gestures weren't spoken of. It's done. Quietly, without pride. Because out here, warmth was sacred. And to offer it to another was the closest thing to grace they knew. Some blankets had stories whispered into them. Words said before sleep. Names spoken only once. Apologies never heard. The wool held it. All absorbed secrets like smoke. In time, a cowboy came to trust his blanket more than most people. It never betrayed, never judged, just waited, night after night, to offer peace. In death, some men were wrapped in their blankets, buried shallow under prairie dirt, cross made from broken wood, a hat laid beside. The blanket became a shroud, a final comfort, a final shelter. It had kept the cold out once. It would do so again, and sleep without waking. So, each night, as eyes closed and stars blinked above, cowboys tucked themselves in with familiar folds. The blanket clung like memory, like breath, like prayer, and whatever the day had taken, it gave a little back. In that woolen embrace, they let go and slept. Asterisk mornings on the trail began with coffee dark, bitter, sacred. It wasn't gourmet. Grounds were dumped straight into boiling water, stirred with a knife or a stick, but it was strong enough to wake the dead. The smell alone stirred sleeping men before their eyes even opened. It clung to the air, richer than any sunrise. First sip always burned the tongue. Second sip tasted like survival. Coffee pots were blackened by years of use. Soot clung to their sides, their handles hot to the touch. No one minded. The ritual mattered more than the taste. A cowboy poured slowly, careful not to spill. Cups were mismatched, some tin, some ceramic, some tinted beyond recognition, but they all held the same sacred brew. Around the morning fire, conversation returned. Low voices, graveled by sleep and smoke. They spoke of weather, horses, nothing urgent. It wasn't a time for plans, it was a time for breath. for warming hands around hot metal, for silence between sips, spreeling, if only for a moment. That life was manageable. The caffeine hit slow, like sunrise. Muscles loosened, minds cleared. The fog of dreams retreated. Some men smoked, others stared into the flames, lost in thoughts they wouldn't share. But the coffee was the common thread, brought them back to their bodies, back to the world, back to the trail. Coffee was brewed with river water, snow melt, even rain caught in canvas. It's clean or not, it boiled long enough to kill doubt. One asked. No one cared. The first hot sip erased the memory of its origin. And, besides, a cowboy's stomach was tougher than most. Sometimes they added sugar, rarely cream. Most took it black, as nature intended. It burned going down and left a taste that lingered for miles, but no one complained. That bitterness was a badge. It meant you'd survived the night. It meant your boots were dry and your fire had held. Coffee grounds were reused, sometimes twice. In lean times, they were stretched thin. A weak pot brought jokes, jeers, good-natured insults. You called this coffee, or creek water, but still, it was drunk, as even bad coffee on the trail was better than none, and the warmth was all that mattered. The fire was rekindled each morning just for it. Even in wind, even in rain, cowboys would squat beside smoking logs, coaxing flame like it was life itself, because in many ways, it was. The fire made the coffee, and the coffee made the cowboy. When the last drop was drunk, the pot was rinsed barely in, packed away. Cups were stowed, ashes kicked, silence returned. But something had changed. Something inside had woken up. The cold felt less sharp. The day felt possible. And so they rose, one by one, ready for whatever the West would offer. And in that simple act, boiling water, sipping slow, staring at flames, they found ritual, repetition, reassurance. The world might shift, the trail might twist, but coffee at dawn remained a tether to earth, a prayer in steam, a promise kept. Asterisk, as the fire dimmed and bodies stilled, a strange kind of honesty filled the camp. In the hours just before sleep, when eyes stared into the dark and voices softened, cowboys sometimes spoke truths they never dared by day. Not loudly, just murmurs, just fragments, but enough to show that even the toughest men carried weight. I ain't heard from my brother in 6 years. Sometimes I dream I never left Missouri. He told me to come back by spring, and I didn't. These weren't stories. They were confessions. Not shared for comfort, but just to be released, to make the silence less heavy. The night gave permission. The stars didn't judge. The wind didn't repeat. A man could speak and know his words would rise with the smoke, never to return. He could close his eyes afterward, lighter than before. Sleep always came easier after truth. Some men stayed silent, but they listened, and in the listening, there was connection. No one interrupted. No one offered solutions. Okay, they just let the words be, in a world that demanded silence. This was the one time it was allowed to break. Confessions weren't always serious. Some were funny, embarrassing tales from towns past, bad card games, worse, romances. They brought laughter soft and quick, but that laughter warmed the camp more than the fire. It reminded them they were still human, still boys in boots. The best listeners never spoke. They just stared at the sky, nodded once, maybe twice. That was enough. You didn't need a response. You just needed to say it. It's to hear your own voice admit something you'd buried. Sometimes, a man would fall silent halfway through a sentence, stop, shake his head, and turn over. The others didn't push, didn't prod. and let him sleep, let the rest hang in the air like a thread cut too soon. Maybe he'd finish it tomorrow, maybe never. Confessions were more than talk. They were memory. Ghosts given names, fears given shape. A way to unload what the trail had layered inside. Some men spoke to their horses, others to the fire. Few just muttered into blankets, hoping no one heard. And in those shared whispers, something softened. Not weakness never, but closeness. The kind born not from love, but from shared survival. The kind only found in dust, cold, and firelight. When morning came, the words were gone. No one repeated them. No one brought them up. The code of the bedroll was silence. What was said at night stayed there, wrapped in wool, cradled in ash, forgotten and forgiven. The sky in the west could change in minutes, clear one moment, black the next. A sudden wind, a crack of thunder, and the whole world shifted. Cowboys learned to read the signs birds, flying low, horses restless, a sudden stillness in the air. But even with warning, storms hit like fists. Rain came sideways, hard and fast. Tents flapped, fires hissed and died. Bedrolls soaked through. The dirt turned slick. Cold crawled into bones. There was no running, no hiding. You hunkered down, held tight, and waited, and hoped your blanket would hold. Lightning painted the landscape in sharp flashes. Trees glowed white for a second, then disappeared. Thunder followed close behind, deep as a drum. It echoed through. Valleys, rattled saddles, made grown men flinch. Nature's voice, loud and merciless. Horses panicked in storms. They kicked, pulled, whinnied. Cowboys rushed to calm them, voices low, hands firm. A stampede could kill. Ropes were tightened, saddles checked. Some men slept with reins in hand, just in case. In heavy rain, fire was impossible. Cold meals, wet socks, sleep, if it came at all, was shallow and shivering. Blankets clung to skin, canned, breath came in clouds. And still, the cowboys endured, 'cause what else could they do? The worst storms brought hail, hard as stone, falling fast. Bruised skin, dented pans, spooked cattle. Cowboys pulled hats low, backs hunched. Every second, under hail, was war. But like all things, it passed. And when it did, silence returned with shocking speed. After storms, everything changed. The air smelled of ozone. The ground steamed. Birds returned. The fire was rebuilt, slower, gentler. And in its glow, men looked at each other with new eyes, not with fear, but with the understanding that they'd endured something together. Clothes were wrung out. Socks hung near fire. Boots dried on sticks. Every item was inspected, mended, if needed. Cowboys moved slower. Sleep came harder. It still came. Storm or not, they still lay down, still tried to dream. Some men loved storms, said they made them feel alive, said they reminded them of home. Others hated them, said they brought bad memories, said the thunder was too close to cannons, two shouts, two things best forgotten. But all agreed storms were part of the West, not obstacles, just chapters. You didn't beat them, you didn't outrun them. You met them, waited, and survived. Like everything else out here. Asterisk smoke clung to everything out west: clothes, hair, saddlebags, even skin. It wasn't acrid like a burning house. It was softer, earthier, a perfume made of mesquite, oak, and pine. Every cowboy carried it with him like a signature. He could smell where he'd camped, smell the miles, the nights, the meals cooked, and memories burned. The smell of smoke meant safety, height, heat, food, light. It reminded you the fire was alive, that the night wasn't all darkness. Cowboys sniffed it like reassurance, like memory. It curled into mustaches, into collars, into blankets. Even long after the flames died, the smoke stayed. Horses didn't mind it. They understood it. Fire meant rest. Smoke meant calm. Some, even, stood closer to feel the warmth, eyes half closed, tails swaying. And as the men lay wrapped in wool, the smoke watched over them too, rising into the stars, drifting across dreams. Some men associated smoke with family, with a father's pipe, a mother's hearth, Sunday meals in small cabins before the trail called. Others smelled smoke and thought of war, of cannon fire, of homes lost. The same scent, different ghosts, but still they breathed it in, 'cause the trail gave no choice. When wind caught it, smoke danced. It spiraled, twisted, crawled low or soared high. It teased eyes, burned throats, made men cough and laugh. They cursed it, waved it away, then welcomed it back. 'Cause without smoke, the night felt colder, the air too clean, too empty. In rain, smoke vanished quickly, snuffed out like a candle. The wet took it, and in its absence, the camp felt quiet, hollow, as if something essential had gone missing. Cowboys missed it without knowing why. Just another layer of comfort taken by the storm. Stories were told through smoke, with hands waving through it, with shadows dancing in its curl. It became part of the tale, rising with excitement, fading with sorrow. Some said ghosts lived in it, that every puff carried an old voice. The past was never really gone, just floating higher. In the morning, smoke told time. The first wisp from rekindled coals meant the day had begun. Men blinked awake, sniffing the air, hoping for coffee, for warmth, for anything familiar. Smoke always arrived first, greeting them like an old friend. Silently, lovingly, cowboys didn't speak of it often, but they noticed. The days that felt off were always the ones without fire, without smoke, without that soft gray thread tying them to the world. It wasn't just sentite, it was presence, it was soul, okay? And so, each night, as fire sparked in breath, slowed, smoke rose, wrapping itself around bedrolls, hats, and horses, marking the camp like memory, fading into sky like prayer. And when sleep came, the last thing many smelled was smoke hand. It was enough. Asterix, the West, wasn't quiet, but between its sounds, there was silence, deep, endless, ancient. It was the space between the coyote's call and the crackle of fire, the pause before a horse exhaled, the breath before a man whispered into the night. This silence didn't press, it held, like the land itself was listening. Cowboys grew to crave it, not the silence of towns filled with tension and stares, but the silence of the open, of nothing said, nothing asked. They could ride for hours and not speak, sleep side by side and not share a word, and yet feel known, seen, held by the same. Hush. Some said the silence was God. Others said it was just space. Either way, it healed. After a long day, when voices wore thin and thoughts spun like dust devils, the silence smoothed it all, wrapped around you like fog, slowed your pulse, invited rest. Children feared it. Grown men needed it. It was a teacher, a reminder that noise was temporary. That truth lived in the spaces where words died. And when a man lay flat on the earth, eyes skyward, he heard it clearer than ever. The sound of nothing, the weight of everything. Not all silence was peaceful. Some nights it warned. When owls stopped hooting, when wind vanished, when even the fire seemed to whisper less, cowboys sensed it, sat up, reached for rifles, 'cause sometimes silence meant danger, meant something was coming, something waiting, but most nights it soothed. it cradled, after stories faded, after last jokes were told, after boots were kicked off and hats pulled low. Then came the silence, long and steady, like a lullaby without music. And in that stillness, dreams were safer. Horses understood it, too. Their ears twitched less, their breath evened out. They lay or stood quietly, feeling what their riders felt, that the world, just for now, had paused, had opened up a space where nothing hurt, where nothing was asked. Cowboys learned not to fear silence, not to fill it, to let it be. That was the gift of the trail. It taught patience. It taught how to hear without ears, to feel without touch. And in that skill, they found something rare, something sacred. Some said silence had texture, that it was thick or thin, depending on the night, that you could reach into it, hold it, shape it like clay. Those were the poets, the dreamers, the ones who stared longest into the dark. Aha, the ones who never quite came back. But all agreed without silence. The West wouldn't be the West. The wind wouldn't matter. Stars wouldn't speak. And sleep wouldn't come. So they welcomed it, breathed it in, and let it carry them, quiet as dust, into morning. Saddles weren't just for riding. At night, they became chairs, tables, and sometimes pillows. Cowboys leaned on them, draped clothes over them, tucked letters under them. The leather creaked softly in the night, warmed by fire, cooled by dew. Every scar, every scratch told a story of trail and time. Some cowboys used saddles as headrests, firm against the ground, not comfortable, but familiar. Others curled beside them, like dogs near a master. The saddle wasn't just gear, it was companion. It had carried their weight, known their shape. At night, it still did. Dreams came strange when you slept by your saddle. Some said it pulled memories out, that the smell of sweat and hide triggered old thoughts of horses lost, towns left, people forgotten. The saddle was a mirror in the dark, and not every man liked what he saw. Yet others found comfort in it. It's like a link to something steady, something that didn't change. When the sky spun and the ground shifted, the saddle stayed. Its buckles, straps, stirrups were constant, predictable, like a heartbeat in leather. Saddlebags were checked before bed. Food, tools, letters, everything counted. Nothing stolen, nothing forgotten. They were packed like secrets, each item a clue to the rider's life. A worn book, a torn photo, pocket knife etched with initials, pieces of identity hidden in plain sight. Some cowboys dreamed of riding even as they slept. Legs twitching, arms shifting, as if their bodies hadn't learned how to be still. The trail haunted them, even in dreams. But near their saddle, they felt safe, as if they could mount and ride at the first sign of trouble. Saddles aged like skin. The more used, the more beautiful. New saddles were stiff, untrustworthy. It took years to break one and to mold it, sweat into it, bleed into it, and by then, it wasn't just a seat. It was a story. Rain ruined saddles. They recovered quickly, draped with coats, protected like gold. A soaked saddle meant a sore ride. And no man could afford that. Saddles were dried by fire, rubbed with oil, mended with care, because there were lifelines. To ride without one was to walk. In towns, saddles were stolen. Out here, they were sacred. No one touched another's without asking, not even to move it closer to fire. That kind of respect was unwritten, but firm. Saddle space was personal space, faded, and fists might fly. So each night, cowboys lay near their saddles, hands sometimes resting on leather, eyes closing slow. And dreams came of horses galloping, rivers crossed, hills crested. And when they woke, the saddle was still there, faithful, waiting, like a friend too loyal to sleep. Asterisk out here. There were no ceilings, no walls, no doors to lock. The sky stretched from horizon to horizon, unbroken. At first, it unnerved some men. So much openness, so much vulnerability. But in time, it became comfort, freedom, proof that nothing held them back. Walls kept things in. It's out here. Nothing was trapped. Voices carried miles. Smoke drifted until it disappeared. Even thoughts felt larger. You could lie on your back and let your mind spill into the stars. Let your heart loosen. Let your spirit stretch. The lack of boundaries didn't mean chaos. It meant trust. Trust in the earth to hold you. In the sky to watch you. Okay? In the wind to warn you. Cowboys didn't need fences. Their bodies understood space. Their instincts drew the lines. Towns had doors, saloon walls, jail bars, but the trail had openness, and in that openness, truth lived. You couldn't lie to the sky, couldn't pretend under starlight. Everything showed eventually, your fears, your regrets, your longing. With no walls, the night breathed. Lee, it moved in waves, cold, soft, sharp. It touched your skin, your hair, your soul. You weren't hidden, but you weren't alone either. The sky saw you, knew you, and didn't ask for anything in return. Some cowboys talked to the sky, told its secrets, asked it questions, made deals with the stars. They didn't expect answers. They just needed to speak, to be heard. In the sky, vast and quiet, listened. Storms moved fast over open land. You could see them coming. Black clouds boiling over red cliffs. Lightning crawling sideways. Walls couldn't protect from that, but awareness could. And so they watched the sky like scripture, like clockwork, like prophecy. At night, the sky became shelter. Not in a physical sense, but emotional. It cradled their worries, absorbed their silence, sang lullabies in constellations. And as sleep claimed them, it wrapped around like the oldest blanket. A sky without walls meant a life without limits. Some men found it terrifying. Others found it addictive. Once you'd slept under open stars, a roof never felt the same again. It closed you in, dimmed the light, took away the wild. So every night, as the stars blinked and the coyotes sang, they lay back and surrendered. No walls, no rules, just breath, just sky, and sleep, soft and vast, like the land itself. The first sign of morning wasn't always the sun neat, was the slow stirring of men gathering their things. Blankets were shaken out, dust flung back into the earth. Bedrolls folded with deliberate rhythm. There was no rush, just repetition, a routine learned through miles and necessity. Every fold had a purpose, every knot knew its place. The fire was the last to be touched, smoldered in silence while everything else was packed. A final breath of heat, a memory of light. Cowboys crouched low, pushing ash with sticks, making sure no embers would burn beyond their watch, leave no trace. That was the rule. The land had given them shelter, it deserved respect. Saddles were hoisted onto backs that had long ago stopped protesting. The weight was familiar, the tug of leather, the creak of stirrup straps. Horses whinnied low, sensing movement. They, too, were creatures of habit, rising with the same rhythm, ready before they were asked. Coffee, if any remained, was gulped in silence. Cups rinsed with leftover water, wiped dry on dusty pans. A handful of jerky or a biscuit, maybe both, shoved into coat pockets for the ride ahead. It wasn't breakfast. It was fuel. No time for ceremony. Boots were always the last thing double-checked. Tied tight, no pebbles inside, no Miss Scorpion crawling up from the night. The first few steps were stiff, but the body remembered. Learned quickly how to become motion again. Some men said a prayer under their breath. Others whispered nothing but thought plenty. The road ahead was long, unknown. A simple wish for dry skies, for quiet hooves, for an easy trail floated into the wind like a feather. When everything was in place, they looked around once more, his eyes scanning for anything forgotten. A glove, a rope, a memory. But usually they left nothing behind except footprints, and even those faded fast under the sun's return. Mounting the horse was its own ritual. 1 foot, 1 lift, 1 settling into worn leather, hands on reins, hat pulled low, breath deep. Not every day started the same, but every departure felt familiar. The road pulled them forward like a quiet promise. They didn't speak much as they rode out. Words came later. First, the silence of departure. The hush of goodbye between man and earth is how the trail said farewell. Not in voices, but in dust rising slowly behind hoofprints, and as the camp disappeared behind them, covered again by sky and space, the day began. The fire was gone. The night was gone, but the rhythm remained. Ride, rest, repeat. The ritual of survival carried in saddlebags and hearts. Firelight changed everything, reshaped the face of a man, casting deep hollows where there were none. Round the camp, flames danced across coats and hats and tired eyes, making ghosts of the living. Shadows stretched across the ground like long fingers, always moving, always whispering. Some cowboys watched the shadows more than the fire itself. There was something about them unpredictable, poetic. They flickered like memory, like dreams you tried to catch but never could. Told stories without sound, painted pictures no one could repeat. At times, they looked like people not present, the outline of a friend long dead, the shape of a woman left behind, a horse that no longer answered when called. Shadows made the past visible, if only for a second, and then it was gone. The fire was alive, but the shadows were its breath. They followed every crackle, every shift of wind. They stretched up tree trunks, crawled across rocks, slithered through boot prints. No corner of camp was free from their touch. When someone stood to speak, the shadows changed again. 1 man, 2 reflections, 1 body, 2 ghosts. The other cowboys watched without comment. They'd seen it before. The fire could double a manure, split him. It depended on what he carried inside. Shadows also served a purpose. They warned of movement, a coyote, a stranger, the twitch of a horse's ear. Cowboys trusted them, Taylor, to see what wasn't obvious, to listen with their eyes. In the flicker of a branch's shadow, they sensed coming rain. Children feared them if they ever traveled the trail. But grown men learned to sit with them. They weren't evil, just echoes, reflections of the world lit from within. Shadows weren't lies, they were just softer truths. Some cowboys spoke to them, quiet words, confessions, promises made to no one but the dark. Maybe it was madness, maybe it was survival. But out there, alone beneath a canvas of stars, you talked to what listened. Eventually, the shadows faded as the fire died. They folded into the ground, into the trees, into the night. They returned to wherever they came from, waiting for the next flame, the next story, the next sleeper to watch them sway. And when sleep came, it was often those shadows that remained behind your eyelids, dancing, whispering, never gone, just waiting to return. Asterisk. The West didn't sleep. Even when the camp was still, the land around it hummed with life. Small creatures moved underfoot: mice, lizards, insects, birds with no songs, only eyes that saw in the dark. The desert had rules, and most of them crawled. The rustle of grass meant something alive. The flicker of eyeshine revealed watchers, not always predators, sometimes just animals on their own paths. But the night was never empty. It was filled with paws, claws, wings, and teeth. Coyotes stayed distant but present, code layered like music, an orchestra of wild voices. Sometimes a bobcat crept near, invisible but felt. Skunks left trails of scent and silence, and snakes, always snakes, slid like secrets near boots. Horses sensed them all. Their ears twitched, their heads lifted. They snorted once, then settled again. They weren't afraid. Swear. They were part of the wilderness too, part of the same quiet dance. Cowboys didn't fear most animals. It was the unexpected that rattled them. A bear out of season, a cougar looking for lost calves, but more often than not, it was nothing. Shadows with fur, sound without danger. The smart ones kept food off the ground, hung it in trees. When trees were present, covered pots, wrapped leftovers. The animals weren't malicious, they were hungry, just like the men who slept beside the fire. Some nights, eyes watched from the dark, reflective, curious, not evil, just interested. And the cowboys, wrapped in wool and smoke, watched back. No rifles lifted, no threats made, just two species, sharing the same space under stars. Occasionally, a brave fox would dart through camp, stealing scraps. It was always a point of humor. There goes the cook's assistant, someone might say. Laughter was rare, but it was honest when it came. The real danger was always man, not beast. And so, they let the creatures be. Let them pass. Let them feed. Let them sing. The night was big enough for all of them, and as the fire dimmed, and the coals whispered their last warmth, the creatures returned to the wild. And the men, listening closely, drifted into sleep not alone, but part of something older than themselves. Asterisk, the stars at night were more than decoration. They were witnesses, ancient and unmoved, watching from above as men slept below. 2. Nights were exactly the same, but the stars offered consistency. Cowboys relied on them for direction and comfort, even when they had no words for it. They didn't name constellations like scholars. They named them like friends. The bright one near the moon, the crooked trail above the canyon, the twin eyes near the mountain's edge. Some nights they seemed so close, it felt like you could climb into them. They sparkled against the black like coins on velvet. The longer you looked, the more you saw. Depths, patterns, stories that no man had ever written down. And in that quiet sky, cowboys remembered how small they were, how wide the world was, how much still-weighted stars didn't need an audience. They didn't beg for attention. They simply existed, and that made them trustworthy, unlike people. Unlike promises, unlike trails that forked without warning, the stars never changed their place without reason. They were still there, night after night, even when clouds tried to hide them. Some said each star was a soul watching over the world. Others said they were just fire too far away to warm anything, but no one argued about their beauty. Even the hardest men, the ones who rarely spoke and never smiled, would glance up and soften. Something about them brought peace, not hope, just ... calm. In the rare silence between fire crackles, you could almost hear them, not in sound, but in feeling, like music that lived inside your chest instead of your ears, like a pulse in the heavens, a slow, steady reminder that the world was still turning, and you were still here. On the darkest night, with no moon to interrupt, the sky became overwhelming, a canvas so wide it made your thoughts shrink. Your regrets disappeared. your anger, faded. All that remained was breath and stillness. The stars did that. They cleaned the mind with quiet light. Sleep under such a sky felt deeper, the dreams more vivid. Some cowboys swore the stars gave visions, clues about the future, memories of the past. Some dreamed of home, others of people they'd never met but felt they'd always known. The stars opened doors. A man could lie awake for hours just watching them, hat over chest, blanket tucked high, eyes refusing to close. Not because of fear, but because he didn't want to miss what the sky was offering. Eventually, sleep would come, slow and certain, but only after the stars had said what they came to say. In the morning, they were gone, faded with the dawn, but the feeling remained, in the breath, in the heart, in the way the day began without rush. The stars didn't give instructions. They gave reminders that life continued, stillness mattered. And so, every night, cowboys looked up for guidance, not for meaning, but out of instinct, as if their hearts recognized something in the sky that the mind had forgotten. And in that gaze, a prayer unspoken was answered. Asterisk's dreams came differently on the trail. They weren't built from routine or yesterday's worries, came from dust and distance, from firelight and silence. Strange, powerful, sometimes beautiful, sometimes frightening. No one controlled what came when their eyes shut under the stars, but all accepted it. Some dreams repeated. It's the same river crossing, the same voice calling from far away, a woman's silhouette at the end of a canyon. Dreams didn't care if they made sense. They simply arrived, carried on wind, woven from the day's unspoken feelings. Cowboys learned to welcome them like old friends who spoke in riddles. A few kept track of their dreams, carved marks on saddle leather, or whispered them into the fire the next night. Not for answers, just to remember, just to name them before they vanished, because some dreams stayed. Like songs you only heard once but couldn't forget. Nightmares had their place too. Horses falling off cliffs, gunfire in slow motion, faces from the past, angry or silent. The fire helped chase them away. So did the nearness of others. Even if no one spoke, the presence of another sleeper nearby made the dark less cruel. Some dreams felt like warnings. Others felt like messages, a missed turn, a lost letter, a whisper from a mother long buried. Hey, cowboys didn't talk about these things in the daylight. But at night, the line between real and dream blurred. And sometimes they acted on what they saw. There were dreams so vivid they left scents behind. The smell of bread, of river water, of perfume. Men would wake sniffing the air, confused by the memory of something that never happened. But they didn't dismiss it. The trail taught you to pay attention to what lingered. Dreams also offered escape from the cold, from the aches, from the weight of a life lived on horseback. In sleep, a cowboy could fly, could run barefoot through green fields, could be someone else entirely. Not forever, but just long enough to rest. There were shared dreams, too, stories that passed between men without ever being spoken. One man would mention a sound in his sleep, and another would nod, having heard it too. Coincidence? Maybe. But out here, coincidences felt more like design. When morning came, most dreams faded like smoke, forgotten before the first boot was pulled on. But some stayed, hung on the edge of the mind, waiting to return. And when they did, they came back stronger, like old friends with news. The earth beneath the cowboy wasn't passive. It recorded everything: footsteps, campfires, spilled coffee, blood, sweat, tears in the soft patches. You could see the outline of where a man slept. In harder ground, only a faint impression, but still there. The ground remembered. more faithfully than men, more clearly than journals, and without judgment. Each camp left traces behind, no matter how careful. Ash from fires scattered by wind, horse prints near water sources, a broken twig, a flattened patch of sagebrush. Cowboys knew how to spot old camps, gores, and they respected them as if walking through someone else's memories. Some said you could tell a man's character by how he treated the ground he slept on, whether he left it wrecked or intact, whether he took from it more than he gave. The wise ones left it clean, quiet, as if they were never there. But the earth always knew, always held the truth beneath the surface. The ground also gave back, warmth stored from the day's sun, a dry patch beneath a tree, slope that cradled, the back just right. Cowboys learned where to lie, where not to, how to read the slope of the land like a storybook. No ink needed, just instinct, just time. They laid their bodies down each night, not just on dirt, but on stories. Stories of those who came before, those who never left. The land was a graveyard and a cradle. It held bones and babies. It was sacred, and they knew it, even if they never spoke the word. Some claimed they could hear the ground, not voices exactly, but sounds. Messages, a creak, a shift, a sigh under the weight of a tired man. The land didn't speak in sentences, Keat. It spoke in pressure, in stillness, in movement too slow for the eye to catch. Rain changed everything. Soft earth turned to mud. Prints deepened. Fires sank. Sleep became harder. But even then, the ground held them, never pushed them away. It accepted whatever was offered: boots, blankets, burdens, and kept it safe until morning. Cowboys rarely thanked the land aloud. That wasn't the way, but their actions spoke. The gentle pat of a hand against dry soil, the way they moved rocks aside, then returned them, the care they showed when leaving. That was thanks enough. Some men felt more at peace lying on the ground than they ever had in a bed. There was no mattress here, but there was truth. No springs, but there was stillness. And in that stillness, sleep found them faster than any feather pillow ever could. The ground didn't lie, didn't flatter, didn't pretend. It just was, K. And that honesty, harsh as it could be, was comforting, K. Because when you sleep on something that remembers, you don't forget who you are. Asterisk, there's a moment in every night when the fire gives its final breath. A soft collapse, a hiss, a glow fading into darkness. It doesn't shout. It simply ceases. Cowboys knew that moment well. They felt it, even in sleep, as if part of their own warmth had gone with it. A quiet loss that didn't need mourning, only acknowledgement. When the fire died, the night took over. The shadows deepened. The stars grew colder, and the wind, once playful, became more serious. No longer held back by heat, it moved through camp like a silent judge, tucking into sleeves, pressing against cheeks, reminding everyone that the dark had rules of its own. Without fire, sound changed. It echoed differently. Voices became whispers or vanished altogether. Even breath sounded louder. The camp became a cathedral of stillness, a sacred hush broken only by the shifting of blankets, the cough of a horse, the scratch of a beard against cloth. Some men missed a fire like they missed a friend. Others welcomed its end, said it helped them sleep. Less light, less distraction, just the dark and whatever thoughts came with it. But all knew the difference. Fire alive was a guardian. Fire gone meant you were truly alone with the night dreams. After the fire's death were different too. Deeper, stranger. You weren't warmed into sleep, you were pushed into it. The cold folded around you, tucking you in with invisible fingers. and the stars blinked a little slower, as if mourning the loss of that tiny sun below. In the morning, only ash remained. A gray pile, sometimes steaming, sometimes already cold. It looked unimpressive, almost sad, but the cowboys knew what had lived there, what had burned, what had comforted. They stirred it with a stick, buried it, honored it with silence. Some tried to keep the fire going all night, feeding it in shifts, but most let it go, let it fade. There was something natural about its death, like breath leaving a body, like a story ending. You didn't fight it, you just watched it pass. When new fire was built the next night, it wasn't just heat being reignited. It was ritual, resurrection, proof that even in a world of endings, something always returned. And in that spark, in that first flame, hope flickered back to life. So when the fire died, no one panicked, no one cursed. They rolled tighter into blankets, pulled hats lower, listened to the new voice of the night, and let themselves drift. Because even without flame, sleep still came. Cold, yes, but still. And in that sleep, the memory of fire lingered, in dreams, in scent, in warmth that had already vanished, but somehow remained, like a ghost that meant no harm. Just a reminder of light. Asterisk horses spoke in silence, in ears that flicked, in breath that steamed in the cold, in hooves shifting on gravel. Cowboys understood every sound, every twitch. A raised head meant alert. A low snort meant irritation. A still body, too still, meant danger. These weren't just animals, they were partners. And at night, they were guardians. They slept standing, half awake, always listening, always present. Even when resting, their bodies stayed ready. And the men, wrapped in wool and dreams, trusted them more than rifles. Horses would sense trouble. First, move first. Wake the camp before anything human could. Tethers tied to trees or stones gave enough room to move, but not enough to run. Trust, but not too much. A startled horse could break a leg, bolt into the night, leave a man stranded miles from anywhere. So the ropes were checked twice, always twice. Some horses nuzzled their riders before sleep, a soft brush of nose to shoulder, a shared moment of breath. Cowboys didn't talk much to people, but to horses, they spoke, called them by name, shared thoughts, too quiet for others. The bond wasn't loud, it was deep. Horses knew their rider's scent, their footsteps, their voice. In towns, in chaos, they still found them. In storms, they didn't flinch if that voice called out. It wasn't training, it was connection. Built mile by mile, fire by fire. At night, the rhythm of a horse breathing nearby brought a calm. It was like sleeping beside a slow river, predictable, soothing, proof that something strong and silent stood between you and the unknown. Cowboys didn't say they loved their horses. They didn't have to. They brushed them with gloved hands before sleep, checked hooves, removed burrs from manes. Quiet rituals done in darkness. Acts of care that spoke louder than any words. And the horses, in turn, stood guard through the night. When a horse cried out, everyone woke. No questions, no hesitation, because that sound wasn't made lightly. It meant something. And in the pitch-black silence of the prairie, it meant everything. It was alarm, warning, plea all in one. Come morning, they greeted each other with small movements, no hugs, no whistles, just presence, a hand on the neck, a nod. The saddle returned, and together they moved forward, as they had yesterday, as they would tomorrow. And when sleep came again, the horses stood nearby, always watching, always listening, breathing warmth into the cold, speaking a language older than words. Some nights were wordless, no jokes, No stories, no laughter, breath, just fire. It's the long exhale of men too tired or too burdened to say anything more. These nights weren't tense. They were sacred. Silence had its place, and everyone understood. The fire cracked, but no one commented. A coyote howled, but no one answered. The coffee boiled, but no one offered a cup. They sat close but distant, each man wrapped in his own thoughts. It wasn't sadness, it was stillness. It's the kind that comes after too much motion in town silence. Felt awkward, heavy. On the trail, it was comfort, permission, a way to exist without explanation. You didn't have to explain your mood, your past, your scars. You just had to be present, so the land accepted you as you were, quiet and whole. Some men carved into wood just to keep their hands busy. Others watched smoke curl into the sky, eyes unfocused. One cleaned his boots, other played with the coals. They didn't look at each other, but they weren't alone. They were connected by what wasn't said. Sometimes silence was shared grief, a letter from home, a friend lost, a memory too sharp to speak. No tears, just stillness. And when sleep came, it was heavier, not darker, just deeper. It's a kind of rest that carried weight. In the morning, the silence lingered for a while, until someone coughed, someone spat, someone mumbled about coffee. Then life returned, slow and unforced. The words came back, but softer, more respectful, because they had remembered how much silence could hold. Those nights weren't forgotten. They became markers. The night we didn't talk. And when we called later, they needed no further description. Everyone knew what it had meant, what had passed through them like a wind without sound. Silence taught things words couldn't. It revealed what mattered, what stayed, and what didn't need to be said to be known. Out there, under stars and beside fire, silence became a kind of language. One every cowboy spoke fluently. Not all moments needed filling. Not all feelings needed voice. Some truths were too wide for language, too wild, too real. So they sat together, apart, letting the silence carry what they couldn't. And when they lay down to sleep, they did so not with noise, but with peace. The kind only silence brings. The kind that lingers long after dreams begin. Asterix's sleep on the trail wasn't sudden. It came like dust, slow, floating, inevitable. It settled over camp, without fanfare. One man rubbed his eyes. Another leaned deeper into his blanket. A third stopped speaking mid-sentence, eyes closing before words ended. The fire still burned. The horses still shifted. But sleep had arrived. It wasn't chased. It was invited. By repetition, by stillness, by the simple truth that exhaustion eventually wins. Cowboys didn't fight it. They let it take them, folded inside wool, under stars, beside fire. There were no beds, no alarms, no dreams of tomorrow. Just the slow slide into nothing. Their bodies didn't ask permission. Muscles relaxed, joints clicked, breath deepened. Even their faces changed, wrinkles smoothing, eyes softer. In those hours, they weren't cowboys. They were just men, vulnerable, human, home for a while, in sleep. Some murmured as they drifted, half words, names, prayers. Others went silently, breath slowing like tide retreating. No performance, no drama, just the honest act of giving in. It's letting the night hold them like a mother would. Sleep came heavier for some, lighter for others, depending on the trail, on the dreams, on the fears that lingered. But it came, always, even to those who thought it wouldn't, even to those who feared it. It came like dust, soft, final dot, and as sleep claimed the camp, the The fire lowered its voice. The wind softened. The stars blinked slower. Even the coyotes waited. The whole world seemed to honor the quiet, as if all of nature understood the sacredness of sleep earned through dust and distance. Time bent during sleep. Hours passed like minutes, or lingered like lifetimes. Cowboys awoke, unsure how long they'd been gone, but they always returned. To fire, to trail, to boots and blankets. Sleep never kept them, borrowed them for a while. In the morning, no one spoke of sleep. No one asked how it was. It was private, personal, a journey taken alone, even when surrounded by others. But all knew it mattered, that without it, nothing else worked. No horse could be ridden, no fire started, no trail followed. So each night, they surrendered again. Lay down, pulled the blanket close, felt the earth beneath them and the sky above, and let sleep come like dust. Not loud, not fast, but faithful, because in the Wild West, sleep wasn't just rest. It was survival, and it was sacred. Asterisk, the sky on the trail didn't just pass above, it aged with you. Night after night, it watched lines deepen on your face, saw your steps grow slower, your voice rougher, and yet it didn't judge, it didn't pity. Simply stayed steady as breath, timeless as the hills. It witnessed you become a different man than the one who first rode into the wild. Each season changed the sky's tone. Spring brought a softness, summer a blaze. Autumn layered the stars with a deeper blue. Winter stripped it clean. But whatever the hue, the sky was constant. A companion that asked nothing in return except that you look up once in a while and remember where you are. You didn't mark your age by birthdays. You marked it by camps, by trails crossed, by sunrises seen and nights survived. A wrinkle wasn't from time, it was from dust, from squinting at horizons too long. But the sky knew, saw you before and after, and it never turned away. There were nights you saw your reflection in it, not in mirrors, but in the way the stars moved, the way clouds drifted like old dreams. You felt the years in your shoulders, in your silence. And somehow, it was okay. The sky made peace with your tiredness. Young cowboys asked about the stars. You didn't always answer. Not because you didn't know, but because some things needed to be learned in silence. It wasn't wisdom you handed down, it was presence. And the sky did the rest. Sometimes, lying on your back, the stars reminded you of faces long gone. Father's laugh, a friend lost at a river, love that never stayed. They weren't ghosts, they were echoes. The sky remembered them too, carried them in its constellations, kept them alive when memory began to fade. Growing old on the trail didn't feel like decline. It felt like understanding. You didn't need to ride the fastest horse or speak the most. You just needed to know when to listen, when to sit still, okay? When to let the wind say what you once tried to say yourself. Your head didn't sit the same. Your hands trembled more near fire, but the earth still held you. The sky still watched, and in their company, age wasn't loss. It was return. Too quiet, too simplicity, too truth stripped of urgency. Some said cowboys shouldn't grow old, that the trail was for the young. But the old ones stayed, not because they had to, but because they'd learned how to be part of the land, not above it, okay? And the land loved them for it. And so you slept, wrapped in time, in memory, in stars, sky above you, not as a stranger but as an old friend, watching, smiling, waiting. There came a time when sleep arrived before your boots were off, when the body, too heavy from the day, surrendered without ritual. You laid down, dust and all, and let the night take you as you were, no pretense, no preparation, limbs falling into stillness. Those nights were different. There was no time to notice the stars, no strength to feed the fire again. You curled on your side, boots still tied, hat still tilted. And dreams came fast raw, unfiltered. Like the body didn't wait for permission to enter rest, boots meant something, meant readiness. That if trouble came, you could rise fast. That if a horse spooked, you could chase. But on these nights, the boot stayed on, not for preparedness, but for exhaustion. And no one judged you for it. Others noticed though. A man sleeping in his boots said something. That he'd ridden harder, carried more weight. Or maybe that his soul needed comfort too deep for rituals. And so they let him be, adding a log to the fire so he didn't wake cold. The dreams, when they came, were strange, dusty, chaotic, sometimes too vivid, sometimes blessedly blank. But even in dreams, the boots remained symbols of something unbroken, anchors to a world that spun faster than the mind could follow. In the morning, your steps were slower, your joints creaked louder. The leather was stiff, molded to the shape of effort. You untied them carefully, like a prayer, stretching toes, letting the feet remember they were human, not hooves. Some men never removed them again, not by choice, but by wear, by time, by the slow fading of energy. And eventually, the boots became part of them, like bark on a tree, like scars on a hand. Proof that they had walked at funerals under open sky. Boots were placed by the grave, upright, silent, empty, but never lifeless. They stood like witnesses, like storytellers with no need for words. And the earth accepted them like it accepted everything else with grace. Cowboys didn't write wills. They didn't leave behind much, but boots told stories better than letters. They remembered steps, trails, hard ground, gentle rain. And for those left behind, that was enough. To know a man had walked in, never backed down. So if you slept in your boots, it wasn't shame, it was truth. That the road had asked more of you that day, and you'd given it, fully, quietly, without complaint. Asterisks, not every fire was the same. Some burned hot and fast, others slow and steady. But every cowboy remembered the first fire he ever built alone. The trembling hands, the stubborn spark, the joy when it finally caught and danced. That fire meant everything. It was the beginning of being dot. It wasn't just flame, it was independence. Proof that you could survive, that you could feed yourself, warm yourself, protect yourself. It's cold. And from that day on, fire wasn't just fire, it was memory. A symbol carried in every camp, every match, every glance at embers. Some built theirs like a ritual 3 sticks, small, tender, careful breath. Others rushed it, cursed it, kicked dirt in frustration until it bloomed. But once it did, the glow in their eyes matched the glow on their faces. A reflection of warmth finally earned fire-taught patience. It punished arrogance. You couldn't force it. You had to listen, to feel, to try again. It didn't care if you were cold. It didn't care if night was coming. It only responded to presence, to steady hands and humble breath. That first fire made every future fire feel sacred, even if you never said it aloud. You sat closer to it. You fed it with care, stared at it not with control, but with respect, like it was something living. Because it was fires brought people together. Around them, silence felt safe. Words flowed softer. Food tasted better. Dreams settled deeper. You could see a man's soul in the way he stared at flame. Whether he was remembering or hoping, whether he was running or arriving. Some kept coals from their first fire, in tin boxes, in glass jars. Not practical, but symbolic. A reminder that they had begun, that they'd once lit something in the dark and kept it alive. That no matter what came later, they'd started with nothing and made light. Stories told by fire stuck better. They lingered in smoke, in sparks, in pauses between logs cracking. The fire didn't just heat the body, warmed the truth, made it easier to say things you wouldn't say in daylight. And when that fire finally died, it didn't really end. The lesson remained. The glow remained. And the next night, a new one would rise, built on memory, a knowing, on the faith that even in the coldest world, you could light something and live. Every fire since was a tribute to that first one, to the boy who became a cowboy, to the man who learned that light, once earned, could never be stolen. Asterisk, at some point, a cowboy stops seeing the sky as something above and begins to feel it as something around, like a blanket, not distant, but close, not cold, but calming. It stretched over the night like a soft hush, pulled across the land to say, "Sleep now, I've got you." There was no ceiling, no attic, just stars, breathing. The ground, hard at first, became familiar, like a bed you shaped over time with your body. Rocks shifted, dirt gave, and in time, you knew where to lie, how to turn, how to let gravity become comfort. No mattress could compare. The earth, after all, had known your weight longer. Some nights, they said nothing, just unrolled the blanket, folded the coat, lay down, let the world fade. There were no schedules, only fatigue, only stillness. The body asked, and the earth responded. It didn't question your reasons, okay? It just held you as you were. A saddle might become a headrest. A hand might tuck under the cheek. A hat tilted forward blocked moonlight. And, just like that, sleep took them, quietly, like dusk turning to night. No fanfare, silence becoming deeper. The stars blinked above, like eyes watching, gentle, patient, never hurried. They didn't push sleep onto youth, they welcomed you into it, as if the sky had opened its arms and whispered, "Rest here, be still a while." Dreams rose slow, like smoke, like the mind walking gently across memory. Some dreams felt like rivers, others like horses without reins. And some nights, there were no dreams at all, just darkness, sweet and safe. In towns, sleep was different. Doors locked, beds too soft, walls too tight. But out here, where sky touched, skin and ground pressed against ribs, sleep was honest. It wasn't rest as luxury, it was rest as surrender. To earth, to time, to sky. Breath slowed, muscles softened. The fire faded behind closed eyes, and the world, vast and wide, became small. Just enough to hold one soul, just enough to carry a cowboy from now to morning without dropping him once. No one needed to say goodnight. The wind did that. The fire did that. The stars, blinking their slow rhythm, said what words could not. And in that hush, the world became pillow and quilt and cradle. And so he slept, wrapped not in walls, but in wind, not in linen, but in light, not in silence, but in the sound of nothing needing him for a while. Asterisk, there's always one ember that stays behind, after the flames are gone, after the logs are ash. A single glowing speck of heat, quiet, but alive. It hums in the dark like a heartbeat, not enough to warm, not enough to light, but enough to remind you. It was all real top boys noticed it, even through sleep-heavy eyes, okay? They saw it out of habit, out of gratitude, okay? That one ember meant the night still held something, a promise, a presence, a thread connecting yesterday's fire to tomorrow's spark. Some would whisper to it before sleep, not words, just breath. A moment shared, like saying goodbye to an old friend without needing a handshake. The ember didn't reply, but it glowed, a little brighter, as if to say, "I'll wait here, I'll watch while you rest." The wind tried to take it, but it stayed, covered in ash, glowing beneath, like memory beneath silence, like love beneath scars. The ember didn't need to roar. Its glow was enough. It had earned the right to be small. In the coldest camps, the ember felt like a miracle. When all else had faded, it remained. And men, who feared nothing, still found comfort in that fragile light. A tether to warmth, to life, to continuity. In the morning, someone would find it, poke it, feed it, breathe life back into it. And the ember, faithful as ever, would rise, become flame again, become fire. And no one would thank it, but they would feel it. Some said the ember was the soul of the fire, the peace that never died, that as long as it lived, the camp lived, and no matter how much the world burned down, one small thing could remain, waiting, watching. It taught patience, taught endurance, the value of staying, of holding on, of glowing, even when no one sees. You, especially then, especially in the dark, and when men finally lay down. Breath slowing, blankets pulled high, that ember kept its watch, steady, still, silent, but not alone. Never alone, because in every cowboy's chest there was a matching ember, quiet, beating, hoping, and through the long night they glowed together. Wind in the west didn't just blow, spoke, carried stories from one hill to another, whispered across camps, around hats, through branches. Some nights it was gentle, like a lullaby. Other nights it howled like memory. But always, it said, something. Cowboys listened, not just with ears, but with skin. They felt the shift in its tone. A warm gust meant comfort, cold one meant change. Its wind told the weather before the clouds arrived. It's told of animals moving, of rivers rising, of someone not far. When it brushed the fire, it changed the shadows. When it curled through bedrolls, it woke dreams. When it passed over lips, it took a little loneliness with it. It left silence in its place, space where sleep could land softly. It carried scents, too, sage, pine, dust, rain on distant rocks. Each smell a chapter, each gust a messenger. The wind never stayed, but it never forgot where it had been. Cowboys sometimes closed their eyes just to feel it better. They said the wind knew names, keys, that it had passed over graves, over towns that no longer stood, over lovers now lost. It remembered all of them, okay? And in the quietest nights, it brought a piece of them back. It didn't judge, didn't linger. It passed through, like everything else in the West. Temporary, powerful, always in motion, but always present, Kevin. In its absence, you missed it. Horses felt it first, ears twitching, nostrils flaring. They knew the language of wind, could read its urgency, could tell if it meant danger or just conversation. Cowboys trusted that instinct. Let it guide their own listening. Some tried to block it, pulled hats lower, wrapped blankets tighter, but eventually they gave in. Let it move through them, like truth, like sorrow, like the slow healing that comes without asking. At dawn, the wind changed again, softer, lighter, less story, more sigh, as if the land itself was exhaling. And the men who rose from sleep breathed it in, knowing they'd heard something, even if they couldn't say what, because not all stories are spoken. Some are felt, on skin, in breath, and the wind, more than any voice, knew how to tell them. Asterisk, there came a night when fear no longer visited. Not because the world had softened, but because the soul had grown still. As cowboys, who once flinched at sounds in the dark, now turned calmly toward them. They had met the wild, and the wild had stepped aside. Fear had burned away in firelight, worn thin by storms, erased by miles. What remained was not recklessness, but acceptance. That death would come when it would. That life was not about avoiding it, but walking beside it with grace. The coyotes could howl, the thunder could roar, a branch could snap, and still the man beneath the blanket wouldn't move, not from pride, but from knowing that most things that frighten never arrived, and those that did could be faced. It wasn't numbness, it was wisdom, hard-earned. Sleep, once fragile, became full. It's like stone resting on stone. No tossing, no sudden waking. It's peace layered on dust and breath and silence. Some had fought fear with fists, others with prayer. But in the end, all came to the same place, to a bedroll unshaken, its two eyes closed, not in defiance, but in calm. To a trust that the world, for all its cruelty, could still hold you. Night sounds became companions, not threats. The crackle of fire, the snort of horses, the whisper of wind, all part of the same lullaby. Fear had been replaced by rhythm, by presence, by truth. You could hear it in the way they breathed, even, deep, anchored, as if their very lungs had learned to sleep without worry, as if the trail, at long last, had given something back peace. Others noticed, said, he sleeps like he's home. And he was, not in a house, but in the wild, in the moment, in himself, where no lock was needed, where no enemy could steal what had already been let go. In the morning, he rose the same way, steady, sure, fearless, not because he had nothing to lose, but because he'd stopped pretending he controlled it all. He rode on, lighter, and the trail made room for him, because when you've let go of fear, even the wildest place feels safe. Every cowboy remembered one camp more than the rest, a place not marked on maps, not defined by terrain, but remembered by feeling, by the warmth of the fire, by the clarity of stars, by the sound of laughter that came easier than usual. It wasn't the biggest camp or the longest stay, but something about it lingered. Maybe it was the people, maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the way the air felt like home. Whatever it was, it stayed long after the boots moved on. They might have shared stories there they'd never told elsewhere, slept deeper than they had in months, or cooked a meal that somehow tasted better. The details faded, a feeling didn't. It was a night etched in soul, not in memory. Some tried to find it again, rode back the same path, looked for the same bend in the river, the same crooked tree, but it wasn't there, 'cause the camp wasn't a place. It was a moment, a grace, a breath caught in time, and yet every new camp was compared to it. Like that one, they'd think, not aloud, just quietly, a silent measurement. Not to diminish the present, but to remember that perfection had once passed by, when the fire was built just right, when the air was still, when the horses were calm, they'd feel it again, just a trace, and smile, and know that some places don't stay in space, they stay in you. No one planned it, no one named it, but that camp was the one they carried, in every trail, in every mile. It was the one they dreamed of when the nights were cold, the one they saw when the stars felt too far. Even in old age, in beds far from dust, they remembered that camp, not with longing, but with gratitude. Once, even just once, the trail had given them magic, and so each new camp was built in its shadow, not to recreate, but to honor, and maybe, just maybe, to create another. Because the West gave you many camps, but only one that stayed. There was a saying on the trail, if death must come, let it come on a night like this, when the fire burns steady, when the stars are clear, when the horses are calm and the wind is kind. A night where the world feels full, not fearful. Cowboys didn't fear death. They feared wasting time, dying with words unspoken, with things undone, but on a good night, with the sky above and the earth below. Even death felt small, manageable, part of the same rhythm that brought sleep. Some felt it coming, not with dread, but with peace. They laid down softer, breathed slower, smiled at the fire a little longer, and if they spoke, it was gentle. A farewell, not to the world, but to worry. The others knew. Didn't ask questions, just stayed close, shared the fire, let the silence speak. And when morning came, if one didn't rise, they didn't cry. They nodded, said nothing, then packed his things with care. The ground became his bed, his final rest, the blanket his shroud, a hat placed on a rock, a boot turned upside down. And then they rode on, quieter but not broken, because in the West, dying wasn't defeat, it was return. And that night, when they made camp again, the fire burned a little brighter, as if to say, he's still here, in the flames, in the stars, in the dust that now danced beside their steps. A good death wasn't loud, damn, it was earned, like sleep, like peace, like light that fades without apology. And in that fading, something remained, memory, honor, a presence that didn't need body to be felt. So, if death came, let it come under open sky, with firelight on your skin, with dust on your boots, with silence in your heart, not afraid, but ready, because the trail never ends, it just opens into something wider. Asterisk. And still, every night, they slept. As long as there was sky, as long as there was earth, as long as a spark could rise from tinder and wood. They lay down without fear, without resistance. They slept because it was time. Sleep was not escape. It was return to silence, to self, to something older than memory, a rhythm older than words, a surrender that brought not loss, but restoration. The night accepted them all, the tired, the broken, the dreamers, the quiet ones who never said what haunted them, the loud ones who laughed too much, the hearts that needed healing, the souls that had already healed. Blankets rustled, fire popped, breath slowed, and land, ancient and wise, held them, not tightly, just enough, just right, and the sky, full of stars, did what it always did, watched. It waited, it whispered, the fire burned lower, horses settled, shadows stretched, and the world exhaled. One long, soft, sacred breath, as if everything agreed this was enough. This was peace, and so they slept, in boots or not, in silence or not, alone or surrounded, dreaming or dreamless. They slept, 'cause the trail had taught them how, 'cause the dust had asked it of them, because the night had earned it. No alarms, no clocks, only stars, only coals, only the promise that morning eventually would come. And when it did, they would rise again, quietly, gratefully, steadily. They would pack, ride, begin again. Not because they had to, but because it was the way, the only way they'd ever known. Until one day, they wouldn't rise. Peace, and even then, the trail would remember them. But for now, they sleep. And you, traveler, listener, dreamer, sleep too, until the morning comes.